Okay, this is a really exciting session that we've got coming up now, which is really about UK innovators that move the needle. It's a really unique opportunity for some of these amazing startups, unicorns, SMEs, with genuinely groundbreaking technology to do a quick 10-minute presentation, innovation that hopefully will inspire you. And like that last track says, you know, that Etta James track around At Last, there's nothing like it, that feeling you find that innovation that you've been waiting for your entire life. And I think hopefully you'll hear about some of that coming up. So we've really got the cream of the crop here, from fusion to carbon capture to energy storage, all the way through into data and quantum computing as well. So we're really welcoming thought leaders with the ideas and technologies that are going to make a huge difference. And we're very, very privileged to kick this session off with Dr. Nicholas Hawker, who is the CEO of First Light Fusion. So Nicholas, please take the stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to awkwardly wait for a second whilst the slides appear. Aha, brilliant. Thank you very much. I'm Nick. I'm CEO and one of the founders of First Light Fusion. This is our mission statement: solving the problem of fusion power with the simplest machine possible. So what is fusion? So fusion is the process which powers the sun, the stars. It's the joining together of light elements to form heavier ones, and that releases energy. So to do this on Earth, we need three things. We need temperature, we need density, and we need time. And it's so fundamental, these three things, that they actually get timed together, applied together, and called the fusion triple product. This is the fuel, deuterium and tritium, two different types of hydrogen. We have to use that fuel because actually the sun uses normal hydrogen, but it's not actually very good at it. Actually, the heat output of the sun per unit volume is less than the metabolic heat output of a person. It's really, really big, you know. So we have to use a different fuel on Earth. That's not going forwards there. Okay, great. So there's two approaches to fusion technology. There's magnetic fusion and inertial fusion. In magnetic fusion, you build a big magnetic bottle which holds the plasma together, and it's a continuous process. It's a steady state device, so it's like a furnace, right? It's just always on, always hot, always burning away. You have to put more fuel in. You have to get rid of the fused products of reaction. Then there's inertial fusion, and inertial fusion is more like an internal combustion engine. It's a pulsed process where you put in a small amount of fuel. There's something equivalent to the spark plug, which triggers the fuel to, and it releases a big pulse of energy. This is where the records stand. So a gain of 0.7 has been shown with magnetic fusion, and huge news at the end of last year. The National Ignition Facility in the US got a gain greater than 1 for the first time. And there's a real genuine physics milestone here, which I'm not going to go into, but it's ignition. It was an ignited burning plasma, not been done outside of a nuclear weapon before. So it's a major step forwards. Okay, so the physics works. So like, why don't we have fusion power? Solving the physics problem is necessary, but it is not sufficient. We also need to solve the engineering challenges of harnessing that energy output, and it's got to be done for the right cost, right? This is where we come in. So we're pursuing a new approach to inertial fusion. It's exactly the same core physics as that result from the National Ignition Facility last year, but it's a much simpler approach with a much better pathway to an eventual power plant. So the core of inertial fusion, what's happening is there's a tiny fuel pellet, 1, 2, 3 millimeters in size, and the process is you implode that fuel pellet at very high velocity. So you squash the fuel really quickly. If you squash it quickly enough, you get the temperatures that you need for fusion. You're also getting the density. Each fuel pellet would release the same amount of energy as a barrel of oil. So this is an incredibly energy-dense process. And that also gives you a feel for the economic value of one fuel pellet, like quite high. So how do you make the fuel pellet implode? So the established method for doing this is to use a very high energy laser, which is great. It works. That's what the National Ignition Facility does. But the laser is very expensive, far too expensive for cost-competitive power production. So at First Light, we have a new approach. It's a different way of harnessing the exact same core process, or like making the exact same core process happen. So instead of the laser, we use a high-velocity projectile as our spark plug, as our energy input. This is a much cheaper system. we use electromagnetic launch of that projectile. So it's like a railgun. What that means is we have to build a big capacitor bank. That's it. It's a much simpler machine. There's also a difference, which I'm not going to go into in huge detail, between the two systems. The NIF laser is not one laser, it's 192 lasers. And that's because they're trying to shine on the fuel capsule from all sides to make a spherical implosion. That means in a power plant, you have a really complicated thing to engineer in the reaction chamber, right in the middle. What we have is one projectile coming from one side only, and that completely changes the set of engineering solutions that we can use for extracting the heat. I haven't got time to go into all of that. You can look on our website, there's fancy animations and all that sort of stuff. And the last part is where we're the same. So they do spherical implosions. That's why they have so many lasers. We are also doing spherical implosions, even though we only have one thing coming from one side. And the key technology that we have, which is proprietary to us, no one else in the world has developed these, have anything even close to what we have, is our amplifier, or that's what we call it. So it's part of the fuel capsule, it's part of the target. The projectile hits the front of the amplifier, and the amplifier transmits that shock to the fuel capsule. And it does two things. It focuses the shape, so it goes from something flat to something spherical. So we deliver a spherical implosion, even though we have this one-sided impact. And it does a second thing, which is it boosts the velocity. So the projectile, for one of our designs we've shown fusion with, the projectile hits at 6.5 kilometers per second. Doesn't matter what the units are. It hits at 6.5, and the fuel implodes at 80. So we achieve an enormous multiplication, enormous concentration of energy through this process. That's the end of the technical stuff. I can talk at great length afterwards if you want to talk to me about the technical side of things. Simplicity is also the key for our commercial strategy. We don't think it's credible for a small company like us to build a power plant. What we have is a consumable item, the target, the fuel capsule, the amplifier, and that gives us a consumables business model. And it's kind of a bit like what Nestle realized. They realized that to make more money from their Nespresso concept, actually they shouldn't build the machines themselves. Where they were making the money is in selling the capsules. So that's exactly the same for us. So there's four aspects to the sort of commercial and engineering of the power plant, and our involvement will decrease as we go from left to right here. And this is the path to maximum scalability of this technology. That's what we need, and very much in the theme of this event today with, Sir Dave King talking on the other stage. We need thousands of these power plants, and we need technology choices. We need to make technology choices and business choices that get us to thousands of power plants. So very quickly, the target, that's our stuff. At the minute, we're basically a one-off precision manufacturing company. We make these things ourselves, and we need to transition to be a precision mass manufacturing company. We think we'll need help with that to start with, but eventually we want to bring that all in-house, capture the whole value. There's the thing which launches the projectile. It's not a very complicated machine, but it's quite specialist. We think we'll have to be involved in the first few, but ultimately we don't want to be involved. That's IP we want to transfer to someone else, big engineering organization that has the capability to build these things all around the globe. The fusion island is how we extract the heat. It's very similar to some existing nuclear technologies. So the nuclear EPCs are extremely well placed here, and they are all now getting extremely interested in fusion as a coming technology. And conventional island is how you go from heat to electricity. Steam turbine, it's literally a catalog item, so there's very little to say there. I think I probably feel like I'm running out of time, but no one's waving at me. 2 minutes, okay, great. So our pilot plant concept is also quite innovative. So one of the fuels for fusion is tritium. It doesn't occur naturally. And because it doesn't occur naturally, that's one of the engineering challenges of fusion, is how are you going to produce it? How are you going to close your fuel cycle within the power plant so you've always got your own supply of tritium? For us and our technology, because of the simple geometry, this is easy to do. And in fact, we can actually easily overproduce tritium. So our pilot plant will have two products. Yes, it will produce electricity, but it will also be deliberately designed to overproduce tritium. And the point is that we supply that tritium to the first generation of commercial plants. We're unblocking scalability here by building our own supply of tritium. But it turns out tritium is really valuable and really expensive. And if you've just built $1 billion power plant, you're willing to pay quite a high price to have some tritium to start it up straight away and be realizing value from that asset. So actually, for our pilot plant, the revenue from tritium could be 5 times higher than the revenue from electricity. So just the tritium sales could pay for the entire pilot plant and actually deliver some profit and return on that investment. So, yep, I will stop there. We're the world's leading inertial fusion company, raised the most money, biggest team, been around longest. Our mission is solving the problem of fusion power with the simplest machine possible. We are raising now, so if you're interested in investing in fusion, I'd love to talk to you. Yep, thank you very much.
Fantastic. Brilliant. So feel free to grab Nick. Any questions afterwards? We don't have time, unfortunately, to do these live on the session today. So you know where he is. Do grab him, give him some money, help him to accelerate his development. I'd now really like to welcome to the stage Amy Ruddock, the VP of Europe and Middle East in terms of carbon capture and carbon engineering. So Amy, welcome.
If we could get slides. Great. Well, good morning. I'm here from Carbon Engineering. We're a direct air capture company based in Canada. And we've been capturing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere since 2015. So what we do when we capture carbon dioxide, we can either take that and we can send it back where it came from, back to the geosphere, creating a negative emission and effectively reversing any emission from any time, any place, anywhere. So left-hand side, back to the geosphere, 1 ± -1 is also 0. And then on the right-hand side, when we've got that carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, we can also combine it with clean hydrogen to create drop-in compatible products like aviation fuels. So direct air capture is just one tool in the climate toolbox. And the use case today is around hard-to-abate sectors. The use case of tomorrow will be the legacy emissions. We already have too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So this chart that we've got on the screen is one from Goldman Sachs. They look at every emission that's happening today, around 54 gigatons, and they look at the levelized cost of abatement of those emissions. It might be quite hard to see from the corners, but effectively you have all of the emissions cost to abate. Right over on the right-hand side, you have transportation, you have agriculture, you have buildings. These are the hard to abate and very expensive to abate sectors. And what we've done is we've superimposed on their cost estimates for direct air capture and sequestration to provide a benchmark of how this stacks up in abatement costs. So effectively, today, at the first plant, first-of-a-kind plant costs, your direct air capture and sequestration is a cost-effective solution for around 5 gigatons of emissions. And at the kind of cost we're targeting in the next decade or so, that 5 gigatons expands to 10 to 15 gigatons. So one of the sectors on the right-hand side of that graph is from aviation. My journey to direct air capture is from a background in aviation. I spent a decade at the Boston Consulting Group in the aviation practice. I was at Virgin Atlantic, where I was VP of Corporate Development and Sustainability. And when I looked at the problem of decarbonizing this sector, many roads led me to direct air capture, both for removals and also for scaling sustainable aviation fuels through power to liquids. So both of those solutions offer a non-disruptive path to decarbonization that can work with today's fleet in aviation. The same is true of maritime, so you can extend many of those arguments. And then I think about the sectors that we talk to about this solution. One other example is corporates thinking about their net zero targets. When they look at their scope 1, 2, and 3, often the toughest emissions are employee travel, so it's linked to this aviation again. So direct air capture effectively gives a solution for those hard-to-abate emissions from any corporate. So us as a company, we were founded in 2009. Our founder was David Keith. He's recently moved to Chicago. Before that, he was at Harvard as a professor. And through his research interests, he saw that there was going to be a need to do carbon removals at scale by mid-century. In 2015, we built our pilot plant, and since we've built an innovation centre next door. That innovation centre in Squamish, British Columbia, just outside Vancouver, is all about testing the next generation of the technology. So we don't stand still, we continue to innovate. But really our focus today is commercial deployment. So we realised that as a small company, it's not going to be us funding and building these large-scale infrastructure projects. So we license our technology. We're working with a company called 1.5. It's a subsidiary of Oxy's low carbon ventures business. They license our technology and they deploy the plants, sometimes in partnership. So construction has started on our first large-scale plant over in Texas. It's recently been named Stratos. Construction started last year. When it's fully operational in 2025, it will be capturing 500,000 tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And then we've also started pre-feed, so the first detailed engineering on a second plant on the Gulf Coast of Texas. And we really see that Texas site as a campus for direct air capture. Our partners, 1.5, have procured enough pore space to deploy 30 megatons of direct air capture at that site. That's equivalent, roughly equivalent to UK aviation's emissions today. So from a first plant, very quickly up into the multiple megaton scale. Our partners have also talked about a scenario where they deploy between 100 and 135 megatons of capacity by 2035. A lot of that will happen in the US, but we're looking for global partnerships to deploy as well. So then I think to the UK, we're in the UK today. Why are we deploying in the US? Well, because it ticks a lot of boxes, both from technological feasibility, but also from policy support. In the policy support, the Inflation Reduction Act has been amazing at catalysing growth in direct air capture. There are tax credits available for capturing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and sequestering it, which will really catalyse the industry. But if I look at the UK, and if I look at what you need to deploy this technology, you need storage for CO2. We've got an abundance of that off the coast of the North Sea. You need infrastructure to be able to transport and store that CO2. We've got development of CCUS clusters happening, and recently 20 billion put towards that. You need a knowledgeable workforce. We find that there's a very high overlap in skill set with oil and gas. We have a traditional oil and gas industry in the North Sea. And then finally, supportive policy. The UK government has talked about an ambition for engineered removals of 5 megatons by 2030 and 23 by 2035. And I think for the UK to become a DAC leader, my message is go big or go home. The way that we get to cost efficiency is we deploy at scale, thinking about 10 megatons or more in a campus. You've not only got economies of scale, economies of permitting, etc. You can also build a local supply chain and really tap into the job opportunities from the sector. So that's all I wanted to talk about. I would close by saying, look, we are deploying at scale today for direct air capture. This isn't the future, this is now. When we deploy globally, we are looking for partners to partner with 1.5 and project develop these facilities. And then we believe that direct air capture and sequestration today provides a solution for any of those hard to abate emissions. So if you're thinking about your residual emissions as a company, don't just think about your reduction targets. Net zero targets mean net zero. Start to think about how much of that removal you'll need to, and help us to catalyse the industry. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Amy. Go big or go home. Anyone want to go home? No. Good. Good signs. Okay. So we've had carbon capture. We've had nuclear fusion. What's next? We've got Scotland's first transmission-connected battery and Zenobē Energy. In a minute, I'd like to welcome to the stage Tom Palmer. He's head of business development at Zenobē. And Tom really works to enable transmission and distribution power grids to transition to a renewable energy world. He's an economist by background, and prior to Zenobē, he's had quite an illustrious career, working at RWE, working at Cornwall Insights, Origami Energy, Palantir Solutions, as well as EDF and Ofgem, which isn't a bad run at all of it. He's worked across renewables, thermal, storage, and upstream oil and gas. So it feels like we've got the right person on stage to take us through Zenobe's first transmission connected battery. Please join me in welcoming Tom to the stage. Thank you, Tom.
Hello, everyone. My name's Tom Palmer, so I'm Head of Business Development at Zenobe Energy. I'm going to give you an introduction into what we're doing, the innovative things we're doing on the network, and the wider part of the business. So Zenobe was founded in 2017. It's actually named partly after the physicist Zenobe Gramme, Belgian, who invented the early stage of a Gramme dynamo. He was innovative. We like to be trying different innovative technologies as well as solutions, financing. It's not just the technology. We effectively design, build, and operate battery storage solutions. That covers three key areas. Firstly, the part that I sit in, which is network infrastructure, which is large-scale storage connected to the network. The second part is electric fleets. That's working with bus companies and low-carbon vehicles and decarbonising those. And then the third part is second life batteries, which I'll go into more detail. Our objective is to make effectively clean power accessible. What that means in reality is that there's more renewables comes on the system. We're allowing that to flow by avoiding the need for network replacement in the short term. We're also supporting as thermal plants come off the system. We're saving money versus the old solutions, and we're also allowing more green power on the network. So as I mentioned, we're split into these two parts on the left and right, network infrastructure and EV fleet. However, we do have a joining bit in the middle, which is effectively software and our second life batteries. So in terms of network infrastructure, we're currently deploying 435 megawatts of storage on the system, and we have a pipeline of more than 1.5 gigawatts of solid connections and projects that we will take forward. We've been the first to go to market with a lot of innovative schemes that National Grid has run, competitive schemes that basically support the business case. In terms of EV fleet, we are the #1 platform in UK, Australia, New Zealand, and other countries now. We have over 1,000 buses, and as you can see, more than 400 electric low-carbon vehicles as well. That covers doing things from the battery on the bus to the network, the charging infrastructure, and more. And then finally, the second life, which is a little-known bit of the business, but obviously we like to be circular, using those batteries on other projects. So it's probably a different crowd in this room, but from those who've watched The Crown to those who've watched Fast and Furious, those batteries have been used on those sets. So they're important in avoiding the diesel generation and also effectively reducing carbon on those sites. So just to give a bit more detail about what we're doing in the network infrastructure side. So here's a very simplified map of the network. You can see the blue represents the large clusters of offshore wind, the green, the onshore wind and solar, and the network that exists. We're developing a large portfolio of batteries located in Scotland. We're investing 750 million in those projects. The aim of that is effectively to allow that power to flow, allowing those offshore wind and onshore wind farms and solar to be able to flow. Network investment takes a long time. It takes many years to build the network to support these. So short-term alternatives are valuable in saving money and allowing that green power to flow. So we're developing these. We are active as well in schemes for National Grid. These are innovative schemes that they've trialled called Pathfinders. So we've been involved in voltage, inertia, short circuit level, and thermal constraint management. And we've been the first to do that with batteries in the UK, and we will continue to do that. And hopefully we'll have another announcement not far away. So basically, you know, we see this as valuable to the grid, supporting the renewable system. Just to go through a few more of those sites in detail. So on the left-hand side is our Cape and Nurse battery. So that is 100 megawatts, 100 megawatt hours, so an hour duration asset. That was the first asset connected to it's the largest in Europe, connected to the transmission network, and is specifically there to provide reactive power services to National Grid. So effectively supporting, because as a lot of the grid is now run on renewables at certain times, you need other services to make sure you have security of supply. So that's vital. The Wishaw battery is another battery, the first located in Scotland on the transmission network. This one is effectively providing constraint management services. So effectively, this allows National Grid to flow more power over existing networks. They have a solution that they can call on a battery to provide additional support in the meantime. So this is a short-term solution that avoids that network upgrade in the immediate. And then finally, we're obviously getting bigger and bigger. Batteries are getting bigger everywhere. We are building currently Black Hillock. This is a 300 megawatt, 600 megawatt battery storage asset. Again, all of these projects combine stacking of different revenues in the market, but this one effectively is also providing a contract for stability services to National Grid, which is effectively that short circuit level and inertia support. Again, which is vital in Scotland, where there is effectively only one CCGT left on the system that barely runs. So you need other solutions. I don't know where my time is. Pretty good, that's good. Just to summarise, I guess, we have here UK's leading the way. I think it was. I actually don't think it is now. We've been very good at creating innovative schemes to support projects like ours. That doesn't mean we haven't been challenging the system designers, but effectively, I don't think we're progressing now. We're a bit lagging behind in some of these elements that maybe the systems, the technology that's being used is out of date to manage some of these problems. There's still regulatory barriers and funding is limited. We've never had innovation funding to support our projects. We've tried to drive the market and tried to de-risk them using people. I guess, we're helping to allow that carbon-free system in 2025 that is being sought by National Grid. And then there is also the target of 2035 of a zero carbon power system. So storage is one solution as part of that. It's not the only solution. Generally at the moment is short duration focused just because of technology. We're always looking at new technologies and seeing what is out there to try and solve the problems. The UK needs a supply chain. That is the big problem that's lacking. I think everyone knows it. We've seen lots of failures in terms of startups. We don't want to go and get batteries from China or whether ideally. We'd like to get domestic products, but the reality is that it isn't there and the support isn't there, frankly. So I think there's a long way to go. You only have to look, the Inflation Reduction Act that was mentioned earlier is a key driver of businesses operating in area. We are active in US because there are signals that drive us to do stuff and be innovative, be creative. EU is following slowly with its own version of the IRA. The UK actually in the budget was the worst because it just reduced a incentive scheme for depreciation on some of the capital allowances that was there. And it was sent completely the wrong message. So there is a lot of work to do there to make this system viable for innovators out there. But it doesn't stop us. We can still do things. Thank you very much and have a great day.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you for that, Tom. I think having that honesty in terms of the feedback around the ecosystem, it's not just about money, it's about the business model, it's about regulation, it's about all of that stuff. And it's really important that we're honest about what we're good at and also what we're not good at. So really good. Okay, so our next speaker, I'm really delighted to have him here, is Gavin Starks, who's the CEO of Icebreaker One. Now, Gavin has created over a dozen companies. He's employed hundreds of people. He's delivered over $100 million in measurable impact, and he's co-chaired the development of the open banking standard. He was also the founder of the CEO and the CEO of the Open Data Institute, and he's raised over $100 million in venture and philanthropic funding. I don't think there's many of us that can hold our hand to that. So he's mentored, he's chaired, he's been non-exec of over 30 different organizations across multiple sectors. And I'm especially pleased to have Gavin here because I like to think this is a bit of an Innovate UK success story in some ways. So a couple of years ago, we launched a competition called Modernising Energy Data Access. Now, Gavin competed against 40 different companies during that competition, some very large corporates globally, and he managed to take first place in that competition to develop Open Energy, which has now evolved into Open Net Zero. And that competition really came out of a program that Innovate did called Prospering from the Energy Revolution. So big thanks for the Prospering from the Energy Revolution team for that one. Gavin, over to you.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you, Matt. Welcome, everyone. It's great to be here. I wanted to start just with a few questions. How many people in the audience here have a data strategy in their business? One. Maybe two, a few. If you don't have a data strategy, why not? And with linked to that, how many organizations here have a chief data officer? Has anyone in the room got, again, maybe a handful of people? Okay, so that is going to shift, and I'll explain why as we go through this. So one of the things around the net zero challenge that we face is we know exactly what needs to be done. The time for theory is over. What we need to do now is work out how to fund it. And to move at the pace that we need to move at, we need to de-risk investment at a pace that we've not done before, and we need to unlock access to capital for everyone. There's a report just out this week from Bloomberg saying that the amount of capital required to address net zero is going to be around $3.6 trillion per annum. When I set up Icebreaker 1, that is the number I set as our target to influence $3.6 trillion per annum of investment to be demonstrably net zero. But to do that, there's a big issue. We need to deliver trust. Markets don't invest unless there is stability and clarity at the policy level, unless the markets are clear what the rules of the game are, and that when it comes to sharing data, that there is a level playing field. Now, with what we've seen over the last 30 plus years, is the most successful information architecture in history. It's responsible now for a double-digit part of our GDP in the UK, and that's called the web. And through the work that we've done previously at the Open Data Institute and the work that we're doing at Icebreaker, we're trying to unlock access to data at web scale. And I'm going to unpack a little bit what that means, because the challenge here we face is a systems challenge. There's a quote here from Donella Meadows from over 30 years ago, which is missing information flows are one of the most common causes of systems malfunction. And we can see this writ large at the moment in many, many different systems. And actually adding and restoring information can be a more powerful intervention, a more powerful investment than rebuilding the infrastructure. And what we're seeing, and we'll have heard today, is the vast changes that are coming to the energy sector. It's no longer a centralized system, it's decentralized. Our cars are going to be part of the energy infrastructure, they're going to be moving around. We've got domestic solar, we've got massively decentralized systems. And so they all have to start interoperating in a different way. And what does interoperability mean in a digital age? Well, it means getting access to data. And I want to also link to my question is your organizational thinking, and this is something I've observed over many decades now. Countries and large organizations tend to think when you have a big problem that you need to put everything in one place. So it's a very physical way of thinking. We need to centralize, we need to bring all the people together, and then we can solve a problem. That isn't the way the web works, and it doesn't scale. So what I'd encourage you to do is ask the question, how can you embody digital thinking in your strategic development? And just to kind of really reinforce this, there are more people online today than existed when I was born, and more machines online than there are people. So I think we're already digital first, and we're trying to catch up very rapidly in this development of ecosystems. And the UN and the World Bank have now published a report saying that investment in digital ecosystems creates a 32 times return. So that's, even if that's out by a factor of 10, it's still worth investing in. So when we think about what's needed to create stability in a data marketplace, and let's be clear, every single thing is going to be emitting data or consuming data or using data in some way in order to make decisions. And that continuous data is that continuous flow of information that drives decisions. And the machines are going to be making the decisions in the mix at scale. We're going to have billions of devices trying to load balance, trying to manage a flexibility market, trying to do demand response to radically improve our efficiency. We can halve our energy consumption if we get this right. That's a massive driver towards net zero. So there are certain things, certain design patterns that are really fundamental to delivering that. One is you've got to have common roles across the market. Another is you've got to have common processes. So in technical language, it means having APIs and on technical systems, but that's the easy bit. This is not a technology problem, and data is never a technology problem, much as all respect to my technical friends. The big challenges are around the legal basis for data sharing, intellectual property, privacy rights, whether they're individual privacy rights or commercial. There've got to be a framework for liability and redress, and this language is quite new when we're thinking about what's in our data strategy. It's also got to be controlled. We've got to be able to trust the data. If you look at the way carbon reporting is done at the moment, and I'm going to quote from a large audit firm, carbon accounting is a bit of a random number generator. We are a very, very long way away from having auditable or assurable or even verifiable data right the way through the value chain that we can believe in and that we can trust. And you're seeing that explode right now in the offset markets as people are saying, well, show me the truth. At the same time, we've got regulators coming into the frame here, the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK, the SEC in the US, that are mandating carbon reporting. So the same level of rigor that is applied to our financial systems is now being applied, or starting to be applied, to the real economy. And we're not ready. Nobody is ready for that transition. So there's a huge amount of work here to be done on secure data sharing. And finally, it has to be universal. It has to be for the whole market. There's no point in building something that only 6 companies have the monopoly around. So this has to be for every SME in the country. We just launched a program with Bankers for Net Zero, bringing people together, bringing the banks together to help unlock green finance for every SME in the UK. The target there is to enable automatic carbon reporting for millions of SMEs across the country by better information flow. So let's just recap on that. Data is not a technology. If you're thinking of data as a technology, please stop. It's also not the new oil. I hate the metaphor for lots of reasons. What it does is it unlocks value the more it's connected. The more data is connected to other data, the more value is created. That's just got something you've got to internalize and work out. Okay, so how do we play a part in that system? Because we have a systems challenge here. And as Matt mentioned, through the Meta program, we launched Open Energy. That's about getting access to energy data, whether that's from a smart meter, or whether it's from a substation, or whether it's from an EV or a wind turbine. How do we connect all of it? We've just launched in the last week the same program in the water sector, which is funded through Ofwat, to say how can we get all of the data from the water sector shared as well. Now, what we're learning in that process is every sector is early on their data journey. All of them. There are some individual leaders that have got better systems, but there is a vast amount of work here. So one of my calls to action here is all innovators who are helping organizations understand how to get data, how to make it useful, how to provide analytics, and so on. Now's the time, because all of them need help. And just again, to paint that picture more broadly, what is the net zero data ecosystem? Well, it covers everything from energy data flow to assets, embodied carbon includes policy. The policy now needs to be more adaptive to respond to what's happening in the world. It goes right the way through to model data, so looking at flexibility markets and energy efficiency and grid optimization, right the way through to greenhouse gas reporting. And these pieces here at the bottom are the things that drive funding back into the rest of the ecosystem. So the more data we can get through here that we can trust and believe and represents impact, the more money will flow. If you can demonstrate impact and prove it, you'll de-risk it for the investment community, whether that's asset managers or whether it's insurers or ultimately whether it's the pension funds. Part of the framework and the architecture here we're building upon is called open banking, which I co-chaired. Open banking is now regulated in the UK. You probably all use it in your businesses. It enables data sharing between any bank and any third party who is part of a thing called a trust framework. So those points at the beginning, I said, here are the 5 principles of a trust framework for data sharing. They are embodied in open banking in the UK. There's over 500 fintechs also plugged into that system. It's been copied in over 80 countries because we open source the standard. So open banking itself is an open standard. It's now globally a $23 billion market. It's projected to be a $140 billion market by 2032. And we really see this now as having sorted out some of the non-technical elements that enable data sharing at market-wide scale. Effectively pre-approves access, but it addresses the liability and legal elements. So what are we doing now? How are we building on that? At Icebreaker One, we are a non-profit. It's very important. We're helping to design the rules. We bring together government. We bring together industry. We convene all of the partners required to work out, one, what is the point? What is the impact? What use cases and user needs are we going to address? It's not just data for data's sake. Secondly, what technical standards need to be applied? What reporting standards need to be applied? What legal standards need to be applied? And what policy framework needs to exist around that? The entry point to this is a new search engine that we've launched called opennetzero.org, which is the start of a journey to saying, how can we fix the first order problem? What data even exists? How would you find the information that you're looking for? Whether that's commercially sensitive information or whether it's completely open data, we want to make it discoverable and then make it much easier for people to share and access and use that data in a trust framework so that it can be verified, so it can be assured, so that you can build a trusted network of net zero data. You'll notice the boxes underneath here as well. Please tell us what you need. So when you come to the site and you search for something, oh, I can't find it, tell us what you need, because we'll go straight back to government and say, well, this is the user need from this community. We'll go straight back to industry and say, this is the user need from your peers. But equally, if you've got data, we're not saying make it available for free. We're saying make it discoverable. So you can submit what data you've got, and then we can make it discoverable. So that's just a very simple call to action. It does feel a bit surreal standing here 30 years into the web and saying we've built a search engine, but it doesn't exist. It's not ready. And that's how early we are on this journey. But the great thing about data and technology is once you've got the wiring in place, it scales like crazy. And you've seen that with things like ChatGPT just recently, obviously looking back at all the kind of different social media growths. So what we see here is the beginnings of a curve for exponential growth. Now, and as we move forward here, we'll start to see regulators getting involved. You'll start to see changes in policy. The data bill that's going through Parliament right now points to this kind of structure. There's a new smart data council in the UK as well, which contains lots of different government departments, and we're part of, to implement the principles of open banking across the rest of the economy. So my call to action is connect, don't collect. Work out how you're going to connect what you're doing with everybody else. This is a systems-wide problem. You can have your individual silos of value creation. That's not in question. But let's connect everything. And please do get in touch with us. We're just at ib1.org. Thank you very much.
Great. Okay. Well, many thanks for that, Gavin. I think there are only a few examples of real ecosystem innovations, and obviously I think the work that the Open Net Zero team are doing around that is key. Out of the hundreds of projects that we funded within Innovate UK, they all have one issue, and that's data. So the more that we can get hold of it, the better. Okay. I'm really excited to introduce our next speaker. Now, this chap I met at the National Quantum Computing Showcase in December last year alongside one of my colleagues who's now joined us within the Ofgem SIF team. And quantum technologies, quantum computing is always one of those things that you think, yeah, it's 5 years out, it's 5 years out. At that showcase, I can honestly say I left my mind on the floor. It was absolutely blown because a lot of this stuff is here now, it's here today. And we're very lucky to have Chris Payne-Dwyer here from the Quantum Technology Hub, Business Development Manager at Quantic. Chris has got a cracking background. He's a member of the leadership group at Quantic, which is the UK's quantum imaging hub. It's also part of the UK National Quantum Technology Programme. He has a technical background in innovation for engineering and physics-based sectors, but he's also the driving force when it comes to forging collaborative projects, strategic partnerships, whether it's with academia, government, or with private industries. He's responsible ultimately for promoting the UK's quantum community, providing them with the best opportunities to generate novel products, commercialize new technologies, and develop the next generation of high-value skills. So this is a really important one to pay attention to. Please join me in welcoming Chris to the stage. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. So I think while they just get our slides up here. So quantum technologies, it's quite a scary term. Not a lot of people have heard of it, or if they have, it's mostly in the areas of quantum computing, and everyone is generally...
Technical issue with the slides.
Right, technical issue with the slides.
You have to go without.
Right, I'm going without slides. Brilliant. Okay, this will be extra fun in terms of quantum technologies then. Brilliant. So quantum technologies, firstly, what on earth does that mean? Lots of people have heard the term. If anything adds more skepticism to hydrogen, net zero, surely quantum is not a good thing to throw into the mix. Oh, brilliant, technical issue resolved. So I am from the Quantum Imaging Hub, and a lot of you are probably thinking, quantum imaging, what's that? We've heard of quantum computing, for example. That's usually the one that you hear on BBC News. Well, actually, there are 4 main areas in quantum technologies. Those are quantum computing, as mentioned, quantum imaging, as I'll explain a lot about today, quantum sensing, so that's things like gravitational sensing, magnetic sensing, and quantum communications, so crypto, hacking, secure networks, and things like that. So first of all, I think it's probably worthwhile just listing into this image here. It's probably the image that people are most familiar with in quantum technologies. This is the chandelier, as they like to refer to it as. Very pretty. This is a superconducting quantum computer. And just to give you an idea of the range and the breadth of quantum technologies, this is one modality of quantum computing. You can have photonics-based, you can have ion trap-based, you can have superconducting. There is a huge plethora, even within the one area of quantum computing that you can dive into. So I really want you to kind of go into this, not with that viewpoint of this is quantum technology, this is what it offers. It is hugely broader than that. In terms of what I actually mean by quantum, that's always the mystery word. I think, again, most people have heard the term, you know, it's something that can be alive or dead or half on, half off, this kind of, you know, superposition, as they like to refer to it as. It's actually a really bad way of looking at quantum technologies. I much prefer this kind of analogy here. So in the world that we exist in, we're all familiar with the idea that we're made of, you know, atoms and small things, right? But on our day-to-day basis, we exist in this kind of macroscopic world. We don't see these individual atoms. We don't interact with these small, minuscule kind of particle levels. But in quantum technologies, that's what we're interested in. So if someone asks you, how would you describe the ocean? You would probably describe it very different to how you would describe a raindrop, a single droplet of water. They're made of the exact same thing, but your mental image, how that would behave, would be completely different. So in quantum technologies, what we're doing is we're actually isolating. That's really the key factor here. We're isolating these single particles of information, and that is what gives us this key kind of difference. It behaves differently when we view it as a separate entity. That is actually probably the best analogy of quantum technologies across the board. So this idea of the rain droplets sort of merging with the wider pool of water, that's the term decoherence. That is actually the challenge. That's the reason why quantum technologies are so hard, because if you're trying to isolate single particles, single atoms, single photons from everything else, well, it's very difficult because everything else is made of particles and atoms and it wants to interact. It's very challenging to do. So this is the challenge of quantum technologies, to prevent this decoherence, to keep it separate, because that's where we get all the useful information, all the useful technology out of it. So, as I mentioned, I'm from quantum imaging, and the main basis of that is photonics. In fact, the UK is one of the leading examples of quantum technology. If anyone was very acute in Jeremy Hunt's recent budget, the announcement that he gave was 2.5 billion for quantum technologies. That's what the UK is funding over the next 10 years. To give you an idea of how much confidence the UK has within this, back in 2014, the UK was the first ever nation to fund quantum technologies as a national organisation. That's where I'm from. I'm part of the UK National Quantum Technology Programme. And that was £1 billion back in 2014. Now they have more than doubled that, 2.5 billion. So in a time of economic turndown, where everything, purse strings are being pulled, everything's getting more and more difficult, the UK has said we're going to increase the funding of this by 250%. That is how confident we are that this has merit. And we are very much one of the leaders internationally within this. And a large component of that is the fact that a huge industry in the UK is photonics based. So lasers, lenses, your iPhone screens, all these kind of things. We do a huge amount in the UK. The statistic, which I always find quite fascinating, is that between pharmaceuticals and photonics, what do you think makes more money in the UK? It's photonics, actually by quite a considerable margin. So most people think pharmaceutical, huge organisation, huge money. Photonics makes more money in the UK than pharmaceuticals. It's absolutely massive. So I'm from quantum imaging, and our main component within that is light. So that's what I mean by photonics. Probably should have, that's me getting a bit carried away in my physics terms there. So when I say photonics, I mean light. A photon is a single particle of light. So what do I need if I'm doing a quantum imaging device? Like what is that? What do I throw into the witch's cauldron of a quantum imaging system? Well, first of all, I probably want something to understand where my light is. Am I seeing the right kind of thing? I need some form of eyes. Well, I need a detector for that. So when I say detector, I'm very much thinking of a camera, as you would generally term as a camera. So the sensors within your iPhone, within any camera system, with any sensor based. So this here is an image, it's a very colourful image, of a SPAD. This is a quantum detector. So a SPAD stands for Single Photon Avalanche Diode. Now I'm going to try and break it down a little bit, because I think everyone's getting a little bit scared of the technical factors here. Single photon, right, what does that mean in real terms? Well, when you take an everyday photo with your iPhone, how many photons do you think are in that image? Ballpark. Anyone want to have a guess? It's about 1 billion photons. There's a lot. There's many of them. Whereas this camera can detect one. So think how sensitive that is. One single photon. That's what we can detect. And we can build these now. This technology exists. This is a real image. It's not made up. It's not computer generated. We have these in the labs. In fact, a lot of you, believe it or not, probably have them in your smartphones already. Does anyone have the latest iPhone? The one that came out last year? There's a SPAD in it, believe it or not. It's a very small SPAD, and what it's used for is gesture control. Whenever you put your phone on on loud, if you put it on speakerphone and then you accidentally put it to your head, the SPAD can tell if it's close to your head or not. That's all it's doing. I'll explain a bit more as we go along. So single photon, so incredibly sensitive. Avalanche diode, we won't worry too much about that in terms of the technical details, but it's how it enables it to be that sensitive. So these technologies exist now. So I want a really sensitive detector. Other thing I put into my little kind of witch's cauldron of how to make a quantum imaging system, or quantum system in general, is I need some very fancy optics. Now, you can do a lot of it in free space, so that means no optics at all. You just literally project it across the room. But a lot of the time we're interested in how we put these systems together. So similar as you had the evolution of electronics being pulled down into a chip, there's a huge amount of interest in doing photonics on a chip level. So there's photonic integrated circuits. So we're really interested in how we manipulate that light. You might imagine that if we're dealing with single photon levels, incredibly sensitive, you don't want to lose any of this light. Stay with me, we're almost there, we're almost there. And then the final thing we need in our quantum system is we need some kind of structural computational component. So if we're dealing with very, very low sensitivities, what do we do with it? You know, I've got my image, Chris. How is it useful to all you lot? How can I make change in terms of net zero? How can I detect hydrogen? Giving a couple of cute clues away here. How can I do logistics? How can I do computing? I need to understand how to manipulate this data. So let's go on to some real world examples. Let's make it a bit more tangible. So if I pull all these things together, I get something similar to this. Okay. So in the far corner, we have a game of what looks like Connect 4. That's actually a SPAD. That's actually one of the SPADs that's in your mobile phones. It's a 4x4. I think most people in this room would probably not deem that as an image, you know, as a photograph, as you understand it. Strictly speaking, from a scientific perspective, it is, but it's a 4x4 pixel array. Not very useful. The two images to the right of this, most people probably would constitute as an image. The middle one is actually one of the researchers has stolen the device from a Kinect. I think they use that for an Xbox. And it just tells depth. That's all it's doing. It's telling the depth of the two individuals. And then the one on the far right-hand side is the traditional RGB image. And then you'll probably notice on the bottom below, we have kind of stick figurines. They're doing pose. What if I told you that that bottom image there that's determining their pose is produced only by the 4x4 array? So we take both of those images, we record them, that's our computational data, and then we completely remove it. We throw the camera in the bin, it's out of there. And yet, using only the detector on the far side, the 4x4, we can determine the pose of these people. So this is an example of a quantum technology. So let me break it down for you. It's a SPAD, single photon. What can you do with single photons? You can determine how far away your object is, because you can say, I'm looking for that one individual photon. Imagine you're in Wembley Stadium and every single person threw a tennis ball at you. It'd be really hard to determine who threw, you picked one tennis ball out, who threw this? That'd be really hard to do. If one person threw a tennis ball at you in Wembley Stadium, you go, that's you over there. So you can determine the origin. You can determine the distance of these photons. So our SPAD, the reason why it's colored is its depth. It's determining the location in depth of our individuals. It's incredibly sensitive. It'd work at night, work in day, work in rain, wind. You can start to see where these things start to become relevant. We can use the data from our high resolution imagery to produce a very concrete result, even though we only have 16 pixels there. So the other advantage we have in quantum technologies is that we understand this data incredibly well, because we know these photons come from these directions. We have absolute solid information about it. It allows us to do a lot more than conventional systems. So some of the applications that you might imagine from a more applicable kind of net zero environment, health and safety. These systems, these camera systems, they're running 16 pixels. energy consumption of that is next to nothing. Never mind solar power, you could practically breathe on this detector and it would run for about 10 years. The energy consumption is so incredibly low. Think of all the cameras in the world, all the CCTV. Let me expand it a little bit more. Data centers. What is fiber optic internet apart from a single fiber with a flashing light and a detector at the other end that goes yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. That's your ones and zeros for your internet. What if I could run it on a system like this, which requires next to no power? We had a conversation with BT. Their data centers, for every 3 watts that they use, 2 of them are for cooling, because they pull through so much energy for their camera systems, for their detectors. What if that disappears overnight because of these sensors? Becomes quite relevant then. You start thinking, oh, actually, hang on a second, quantum technology is quite interesting now. Okay, other areas. So what if I then take my single photon detector and I mix it with some fancy quantum optics, and I try and send a piece of light down a single fiber. Right, it's really easy to send a color down a single piece of fiber. Everyone's seen those Christmas trees, you know, that light up different colors? Very easy. Oh, very easy to send a single color down a fiber like a Christmas tree. Very, very, very difficult to send a video down a single fiber. But what if you could? Well, we can. We can do exactly that. So again, imagine the amount of information that you can send down a data center. Here is actually a medical application. So what we realize is if you can send a video down a single fiber, you can use it for surgery applications. So the single fiber is embedded within that needle. You want to go to a hospital and find out what's wrong inside you, pop, video. So to give you an example of what's happening here, this is Peter from one of our labs who's having a great time. He took the ground truth image with an iPhone camera, literally down a tube. So that's what you would imagine you would see. The single photon detector detects the reflectivity, so the amount of light that's coming back. It can detect depth, and we can combine them together to make a 3D image. Now again, let's think about this in a net zero kind of context. Wind farms, nuclear fusion reactors, things that are difficult to get to, access points. What if I can send this single fiber, which is the width of a human hair, and just line it anywhere I want to look? So you want to inspect your wind turbines? Okay, that's fine. We just embed the single fiber into we stick it on the side, or maybe we put it in during the manufacturing process. The chap who comes along to check if it's okay sticks a camera on the end at the bottom and goes, yep, that's fine, I can see inside. Nuclear fusion reactors, not exactly a great place to be and hang out. It's also not a great place for a lot of electronic cameras to hang out. They break, they die. So no problem, let's just have a 100-meter fiber that goes way outside the reactor, and then everyone who wants to look inside just goes, yep, it's fine. Okay, I can see, it's all magical, or nope, that's got a crack in it, that needs looking at. Car engines, wind turbine engines, plane engines, all of these difficult areas that cause problems, we can sort that out. So this came from a medical kind of viewpoint, but we realized there's loads of things that's hard to access that's important to know it's working correctly. This is what some of the things that quantum technologies can do. And then probably the largest subject in quantum imaging is LiDAR. Everyone's heard of LiDAR. Crikey, can't get over the term LiDAR. It comes up every day. So a lot of LiDAR systems are actually quantum systems. Most people don't realize that. So again, let's think about what we've got here. So we've got a single photon detector, right? So it's incredibly sensitive. We can detect at really long ranges because of our sensitivity. It's photonics based, so we can use lasers to pinpoint accuracy. We have good computational understanding Okay, that will be helpful for identifying what we're imaging. And very importantly, because we know where that photon came from, we have a much better idea with single photon, we can image through obscurance. So here we have a bit of a camouflage net, but imagine you're driving along, you've got your nice EV self-drive car, you've saved lots of carbon, and it rains. Oh dear, your LiDAR systems really struggle now. It's foggy. So there's a good reason why a lot of self-drive systems are in California. Has anyone gone to California? It's quite nice weather there. They're not really out when it rains. I mean, I'm based at the University of Glasgow. We don't have many self-drive cars, I'll tell you that. So single photon detectors solve that problem. We can tune them at the right wavelengths, at the right sensitivity, that you can start to image through these things. So hopefully that's given you a bit of a broader sense of what quantum technologies are. They are certainly not quantum computing. The other thing is, again, as I mentioned before, all of these results, they're not mocked up. You know, this is a real experimental result. A lot of you have SPADs already in your camera phones. Canon last year came out with a 3.8 megapixel SPAD. So I know that I displayed a 4x4 one, but they are coming hot and fast. There are plenty of examples of this. So in terms of, we live in a photonics world. So if we can make that photonic system more efficient, do more for us, we can achieve a hell of a lot. So quantum technologies, 2.5 billion over the next 10 years. The community is very eager to engage. So I work in business development and strategy, so I have academics throwing ideas at me all the time. They're like, Chris, would this be interesting? We can do hydrogen detection, we can do methane, we can do self-drive cars. And I'm like, yes, it's all interesting, but the wider public do not understand it. You need to engage with them to really understand the pinpoints, because they have heard of quantum computing. All they know is it's this big shiny box that IBM and Google work on, and it's going to crack and, you know, hack your emails and all that kind of stuff, and the NSA is really keen on it. That's their understanding of quantum technologies right now. People, you know, these really important schemes like net zero, people cannot connect the dots here, even though it's hugely impactful. There's a chap who I'm quite happy to work with, John Lincoln, is a very prominent name in the photonics community. He said to me, Chris, the reason why I want to get more people involved in quantum and photonics is the impact. So he designed some of the components that go into data centers, right? And about 3/4 of the world use the configuration of the data centers that he designed. So he says that 3/4 of the world use his system every single day, day in, day out. And he is therefore impacted massively. Every time you do a Google search, every time you access your emails, you are using his systems. So if you can make that better, what more of an impact can you think of? You know, these are the things that young people really want to hear when they're choosing their careers, when they're deciding what to invest in. How more of an impact can you make than in a photonics-based and a quantum-based system? Is far larger than you might think. So that's, I believe, the end of, nuclear fusion. It's one of the examples. Actually, I'll talk about this just briefly, because I think I've got a little bit of time. So, so we've got a really interesting project at the moment with UK AEA. So this is somewhat what I alluded to earlier. So this is a nuclear fusion, not your typical nuclear device. I'm sure everyone's kind of seen these images before. It gives off neutron radiation, and they have to have portholes in the side of this, and they're about so big, you know, rather large, causes a huge headache for the engineering. We talked to them about some of the quantum solutions that we can bring, and again, they had very much heard of quantum computing, so we said, hang on a minute, quantum imaging and sensing, we can do something here. So the project that we worked with them on, they reckon that they probably got rid of about 5-10 years worth of headaches just from engaging with us in terms of engineering. So a lot of our systems are being put into the new ITER program in the south of France. That's a very good example. This is the inside of JET, which is the Joint European Tokamak, which is in Oxford, here in the UK. And again, some of our systems are going to be trialed there as well. So we definitely have relevance here, now, and today. So that's me, very quickly. I tried to ramble on a little bit to take up time. I don't know if anyone has any questions. It's a lot to take in, but that's quantum technologies for you. So hopefully you have a wider viewpoint from it now. It's not all chandeliers and quantum computing. It's a lot more than that. So, brilliant.
Wow. How's everyone's brains doing? Like, level of cognition around some of that stuff is pretty mind-blowing in terms of when you hear about quantum and when you see it in reality, cameras that can see through walls. If you work in the energy sector and you're not talking to these guys, then I think we've got an issue. We need to find a way of closing the gap where it's less purely about the academic side of things and much more about the business end. So don't let Chris leave until you've got a project with him. Okay, cool. We're coming to the last session of this morning, and it's another good one. So I'm really pleased to be introducing James Stevenson, who's really been working at Promethean Particles on next generation carbon capture. So James joined Promethean as CEO back in 2020. With an extensive background in chemical manufacturing and processing, his career spans both sides of the Atlantic. He's worked for Dow Corning, now Dow, for more than 16 years in the UK and the US, where he became global product manager for its electronics and advanced materials business. So while he was over there, James worked with nanomaterials, leading an internal startup developing silicon nanoparticle-based inks for printed electronics. And since then, he was general manager for Polyon Corporation's composites business and vice president of global business development at the Carlisle Fluid Technologies. So, without further ado, I'd very much...
Thank you. Then, okay. Good morning. Hope everyone's having a good show. Yeah, I think we should be okay now. I'm not sure I could follow the quantum computing thing. There is some science in here, but nowhere near to that degree. But I'd like to, when we heard that there was this session on innovators moving the needle, we felt it. This one. It's not the first time. Try this one. Okay, do you want to switch that one off then? Okay, we will try Take two, flee. Two, three. I think this one works, but maybe not for someone my height. Speak like this. Does that one work? Of course it does. How about that? Yeah? I feel like Terry Wogan or something. All right, we'll try maybe take 3 or 4 or 5, whichever one it may be. But anyway, as I was saying, I'm glad to, when we heard that they were doing a session on innovators moving the needle, it felt like a great fit for Promethean, because I think that's what we're doing. So glad to be able to give you a talk today on what we're doing, and hopefully we may have some time for some questions, but if not, there should be opportunity to connect afterwards. So at Promethean, our thesis is quite a simple one, right? And going from left to right, it's increasingly being viewed that carbon capture is essential in terms of being able to tackle climate change and meeting global decarbonization targets. So when it comes to carbon capture, some of the existing technology has some limitations, which I'll talk a little bit more about, and that happens in every technology in every industry, but those limitations also present opportunities. There are an exciting class of materials called MOFs, or metal organic frameworks, that many of you may have heard of. And they've shown a lot of promise for a long time. The problem with MOFs has been they've only been able to be made in sort of gram quantities and exorbitantly expensive, somewhat as a prohibition to their use in industrial scale applications. And so really, that's where Promethean comes in. And our technology uniquely enables the production of these materials at high scale and at the cost necessary to do these in global decarbonization projects. So what I'll do now is go through each one of those a little bit in a bit more detail. So it's widely viewed that climate change and global warming are one of the single biggest threats to humanity today. And if you think about what came out of the 2015 Paris Agreement, it was all that we needed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 45% just to stay within the 1.5-degree target that was broached at the time. Now, there are many who will feel that that target is already unachievable, unfortunately, despite all the effort that's ongoing. So there are a number of different approaches that can be employed to try and help with that. Sort of what, stealing a marketing term, is what we call the decarbonization mix that you can see over on the right. So carbon capture is a piece of that, part of what they call deep decarbonization. But in addition, there are other approaches and other strategies that can be used, such as making all our processes more energy efficient and potentially even switching fuels, especially away from fossil-based sources. But not all industries, and certainly in the hard-to-abate sector, not all processes can simply switch fuels. They can't electrify their processes, at least not in the short term. And so that's why it's becoming increasingly viewed that carbon capture and carbon removal has to be part of the solution. Again, potentially in the short term, but we need to get started and more needs to be done. So when you think about that then, if carbon capture is needed, let's look at the technology that exists today. And by far the dominant technology in carbon capture, and there'll be plenty of people here with new solutions as well, but it's amine scrubbing, so what we call amine-based carbon capture. And it's a liquid solvent-based technology. And the really great thing about amines is they love carbon dioxide. They form a very strong chemical bond, so they're quite efficient at removing CO2 from, say, a flue gas stream. But the really bad thing, or one of the bad things about amines, is that they really love carbon dioxide, right? And so that chemical bond takes an awful lot of energy in order to get that amine to release the CO2 again, so that the CO2 can move off for either further utilization or sequestration, but so that that amine can loop back round and be utilized another time. And so, you're not using, again, exorbitant amounts of the material. So that energy that I described is what I tried to show on the bottom right here. And if you go back to the original amines that we used in the space, so monoethyl amine as an example, there's an energy penalty there of 3.6 gigajoules per ton of CO2 captured. Now, innovation always exists, and those materials have been proved over time. And some of the latest amines are around 2.3 gigajoules per ton of CO2. And when we've had conversations with carbon capture companies as well as some of the amine providers, they see a floor of around 2 gigajoules per ton of CO2, which you can see represented by the yellow line there. Now, there are non-amine-based technologies as well, and some of those teams are here this week, and they've already broken through that 2 gigajoule per ton barrier. They're down at sort of 1.8 and 1.9, and I'm sure they're going to continue to progress that as well. But when you look at a MOF-based system, we're already as an early technology in the 0.8 to 1.2 range, so significantly lower already. So just to put that into context though, so let's say you're a power generator and you're operating a 650 megawatt power station. If you're using an amine-based carbon capture system, you're going to use 30 to 40% of the power generated in that system just to power the reboiler to get the amine out of the CO2 out of the amine. That's pretty significant. If you're spending £1 billion on a power generation plant and hoping to get 650 megawatts, and you'd want to do it cleanly, you're losing 40% of that power. So that's what the drive for energy efficiency is really all about. Now, there are a couple of other challenges with amine, which I won't spend too much time on them from a EHS perspective, but really from a footprint perspective. Because of that energy that you need to put in, you need a large reboiler, you need a large regeneration column, and you can't quite see it on the slide, but that's picture on the left there, that's actually one of the new modern, smaller carbon capture plants, and you probably can just about see the people at the bottom to give you a sense of scale. So from a modularity perspective, and for people with smaller and lower emissions, carbon capture using amines and those type of systems is potentially just not even viable at all. So let's talk a little bit about these materials called metal organic frameworks. Maybe just as a show of hands, who has heard of them in any way, shape, or form? Okay, so a few. So they've been around for quite some time. Probably since the late 90s, there's about 100,000 different compounds that have been identified, and not all of them by any means are suitable for carbon capture. But the best way to think about them is they're sort of little filters, sieves, sponges, and they trap the CO2 differently. So instead of it being a strong chemical bond, imagine dirt flowing through a sponge as an example, the dirt will get trapped in the pores. So in a similar way, when you want to release that, you can apply different forces to that sponge in order to get the dirt out. You can, in MOF's case, you can do what's called a temperature swing. You can change the temperature that it's exposed to. You can also change the pressure that it sees. So that can go from high pressure to low pressure, or from a reasonable pressure down to vacuum. That pressure swing is a way to get the CO2 out of the MOF. And it's much, much less energy intensive, as I showed you on the previous slide. One of the things that MOFs are famous for are their super high surface areas, right? So figures of about 7,000 meters squared per gram have been talked about. So to put that into context for you, if you were able to take half a teaspoon of MOF, and in some way you were able to unfurl and unroll all of that into a flat surface, that half a teaspoon would cover the entire floor of this show, not this room, the show, 3 times over, right, from half a teaspoon. So that's one of the properties that makes them quite a special material. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, if you Google MOFs today, you're going to get quotes popping up for grams or half a gram of material, in the 10 to 15,000 pound a kilo range. And if you want a kilo, it'll say, please call us and let's have a discussion, because they're just not typically available at that kind of scale. And that's where our technology comes in. So we operate a continuous flow manufacturing process. Most MOF production historically has been through batch hydrothermal synthesis. That's where you put all the materials into a vessel together, all the reactant materials, and you heat the vessel up, and that starts the nucleation and the growth of the MOF. We do that by taking the one material in the downflow, typically a hot water or a hot solvent, and you blast against that the cold metal salt, and that's what starts that nucleation. And maybe to give an example of that, maybe take you back to some of your science experiments at school, if you remember that. Remember trying to grow the crystal in a jar? you'd take a pencil with a piece of string, maybe a paper clip on the bottom, you'd soak it in a supersaturated solution and leave it for a month, and you'd get this crystal at the end of the month. Well, batch hydrothermal synthesis does that in days. We do it in milliseconds. So we produce those MOFs, millions of those MOFs, tiny particle size, and we do it instantaneously. We also find that our process yields significantly higher MOF quality. So one of the things we like to say is that not all MOFs are created equally. You know, we've seen and had reports from our customers where surface area of our competitors' MOFs is maybe 50% of ours. Some of the unreacted raw materials stay in the pore space, which is really important for the application. So you end up with a sort of dirty or unpure MOF, for want of a better term. So, you know, that's really important as well. So our reactor designs are patented, and I'll talk about that a little bit more coming up. We have some new patents in filing and significant amount of know-how within the organization. But it's our genuine belief that our continuous flow approach is really what's unlocking the potential of these MOFs for these kind of applications. So I talked about that unprecedented scale, and this is an important reference point as well. So this is not a pilot bench scale thing. We have a 1,000-ton capacity plant at our facility in Nottingham, and that's really only the beginning. You know, based on what we can gather, obviously competitors don't always talk about what their capacity is, but we feel that's somewhere around 250 times what anybody else can do today. And one of the patents that I mentioned before will take that capacity by a factor of 10 for half the capex and half the space. So we're really continuing to push the envelope on what this can do. But I'll keep that 1,000 tons per year capacity in mind, because it'll be important coming up later on. That 1,000 tons a year is probably enough to capture about 3.5 million tons of CO2 if you use MOFs. So obviously we'll take that to 35 million tons with our 10 times increase. But that's just a drop in the ocean when it comes to how much would be needed to deploy MOFs on a global industrial level. In terms of process, I talked about the reactor. That's really what you can see over on the left. So we produce that as a dilute dispersion. You then have to get it into a form that customers can use. So that steps through some washing and concentration steps. Occasionally there's some formulation required depending on the final shape of what your customer may want. But ultimately then you dry that into typically a pellet or a powder, more often than not a pellet these days, and be able to provide that to go into, you know, structured columns and things like that that you can flow the flue gas through. So when you talk about a MOF-based carbon capture system, so I've depicted kind of our little part in the process up in the left of the infographic there. At the bottom left, you've got the emitter, which now is not putting out their flue gas through stacks into the atmosphere. That flue gas is being piped into a carbon capture MOF-based system. And it's relatively simple. In some ways, it operates very similar to how an amine-based system would work, but without the huge energy input, right? So eventually, or to start off with, that flue gas will flow through the first column. At some point, you know, that CO2 is going to get adsorbed into that MOF, and at some point that first bed will get saturated. Just before that happens, you divert the flow to the second bed, and then eventually to the third bed, and then that first bed can go into regeneration mode. So valves close, you could pull vacuum on the first bed, that will release the CO2, that flows through other pipes out to either temporary on-site compression and storage, or could be transported off for further utilization, sequestration, hopefully more utilization over time as we find ever better uses for CO2 in chemistry. But it's a relatively simple process and quite cost effective, and I'll give you some examples of that coming up. So I wanted to mention the scale. So on here you can see, I use some numbers from Global Carbon Project of 2022. They all roughly agree, but obviously there are some differences, as I'm sure you're aware. But unfortunately, their view of 2022 is that we actually went up from about 36 gigatons or 36 billion tons in 2021 to 41.4. All right. So despite all the activity that you can hear about at this show and every conference that you go to in the space, at least in the very, very short term, there's a view that the number's increasing. 37.5 billion tons of that is coming from fossil-based CO2 emissions. So I just did a quick calculation to look at, let's just take the US and the EU side of that, which roughly equates for about 20% of the global emissions from that basis. And if you use some of our standard calculations around how much a MOF can absorb and how often are you going to recycle those beds, you're going to need 2.3 to 2.8 million tons just to be able to decarbonize Europe and US. Now, by no means do I think we're going to do all of that. There is a place for amine scrubbers, right? I'm not going to say that because the world needs decarbonization now. Our technology is next generation technology. And if you came to me tomorrow and said, we want to put in a carbon capture plant for our facility, and if it was feasible, go with the amine for now. We have to make progress and we have to start. But in the longer term, we need to be able to offer a more energy-friendly solution. And that's what we think MOFs can do. So in terms of our own development, hopefully people are familiar with technology readiness levels. If you're not, it's just a standardized way of describing a technology that evolves from conception all the way through to commercialization and production. So it goes on a 1 to 9 scale. I've started here in what they call the Valley of Death, right? This is where the steps between the individual levels take more and more resource and have a higher risk of failure. But I think we feel that we've traversed this pretty well. We started with some benchtop work at the TGA. A TGA allows you basically in a controlled atmosphere, if you expose some MOF to CO2, does it get heavier? And it did. We then purchased this state-of-the-art dynamic breakthrough analyzer. We still think it might be one of the only ones in the UK. It was about $100,000 piece of kit. But it allows you now to dynamically see what's happening as you flow flue gas over the MOF. And it continued to show that MOFs, when exposed to CO2, can absorb all the way up to this saturation or this breakthrough point, and then it then passes through. Again, exactly what you would expect it to do. Our TRL5 demonstration was a very rudimentary small project that was supported by DRAX as well as the University of Nottingham and the UK Climate Change and Research Council, or UK CCSRC. So that was just really designed to show our first relevant experience and a relevant environment demonstration. This used real flue gas at DRAX's incubation area. And again, there's obviously some system optimization to be done, but we were pleased with the results. We saw that MOF could survive in the presence of real flue gas. And it showed the encouragement that leads to further spend, further development into TRL6 and TRL7. So our TRL6 unit is about to be delivered next week. Again, still pretty small. It's only 100 to 300 kilograms of CO2 a day. But we'll be able to fasten this one to Promethean's gas boiler. I mentioned we use hot water, so we've got our own 1 megawatt gas boiler at Promethean. It's an instant source of demonstration and trial flue gas, right? So we'll minimize that as much as necessary, but you know, what we'll be able to do in a much more sophisticated system is cycle between bed and bed. And that will be enough for us to demonstrate TRL6. I had hoped to be able to talk about our TRL7 project here, but for reasons I can't get into, I can't explain why I can't tell you. But hopefully within a week, hopefully a month or so, we'll be able to disclose exactly what that is. But we're very excited about it. It's still relatively small scale. It's between 1 to 3 tons per day of CO2 capture. But what's exciting about this is its footprint is very small and it'll cost less than £200,000. Now, there are other technologies out there that you can hear about where their 1 ton per day system costs $3.5 million. So we're 3 times bigger and for 1/7 of the cost, which again supports and validates our feeling that MOFs are going to offer a great solution moving forward. They're not necessarily going to be everything for everything. There's going to be a time and a place for different technologies, but we certainly believe that MOFs can play a significant role in decarbonization moving forward. So technical progress is one thing. Obviously, as a small early phase company, commercial traction is also really important. And this is not the full extent of every interaction that we've had. It's just designed to bucket off and show where we've been active. So clearly the team has been really busy in having many conversations and supplying samples. We've conducted numerous pilot projects, and that list continues to grow. And for some of the grant-funded work that we've done in the past with UKRI and others, we've had significant letters of support from some blue-chip organizations. We've got several letters of intent underway. We've got one that's been signed, and I'm pleased to say that since I had to submit these slides, the supply contract in the top right-hand side is now green. We've just accepted an order for 4 tons of MOF. Now, I say that like it's a huge thing, right, compared to the specialty chemical industry. 4 tons is not a lot. But I challenge you to go and Google MOFs and see how many responses you get for gram quantities. So in the MOF world, 4 tons is groundbreaking. I don't think there's an order out there for 4 tons of MOF anywhere else in the world. So we're really pleased with the work, and I'm particularly proud of the work that the team's done in getting us to this point. So basically, last slide, just a little bit of an overview of Promethean. I'm more excited about what we're doing than about the company itself, right? But I'm also a CEO, and I have to raise some money, so I do have to talk about who we are and what we do. We were founded in 2007 as a spin-out from the University of Nottingham. We're currently focused on MOFs, and certainly MOFs for carbon capture, but MOFs have got all kinds of utility. We are involved in some other projects on gas storage, gas separation, as well as water harvesting. So there are different MOFs that can play in that space as well. I've talked about the plant before, so I won't cover that again. But we are venture capital backed with a very good mix of private and institutional investors. And we are just about 4 to 6 weeks away from kicking off our Series A round, which I'd be more than happy to continue any conversations with you if you have any interest in that. I don't know if this setup with some of the IT challenges is going to lend itself to any Q&A, but if not, we have a stand here. Please come and visit us at F42, which is just over here, and glad to continue the conversation. Okay, thank you very much.